the big thing I wanted to ask you about is, I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions around women's issues and Islam and just the Muslim culture in general. And I want to know what some of the big ones are. What are some things people seem to be a little confused about?
Well, I would say, first of all, women overall in many of our civilizations have really had a hard time, and still even here I think we have a lot of problems, so I think overall men have not done a great job at honoring women. But the Prophet Muhammad said, the best of you are the best of you to women folk, and he said no one honors a woman except an honorable man, and no one denigrates a woman except a degraded man. And historically, people, in this enlightened age, we can look back on the past, but people don't realize the revolutions that occurred with the Prophet Muhammad and women. In fact, if you read Florence Nightingale's, I actually wrote an article called Florence of Arabia. She lived in Egypt and wrote a beautiful essay about Islam, and she actually just found that, the attitudes were very high, but she felt that the women were very oppressed in Egypt. And she said, I kept hearing my heart say, turn to Mecca, turn to Mecca. And then she said, oh, if only there was a place for women in this religion. And I think, there's a lot of problems in the Muslim world vis-a-vis women, because these are patriarchal societies that I think in many ways the Prophet tried to undermine a lot of the patriarchy that existed in the Arab culture, but it was quickly reestablished. And so I think there's a lot I'll just give you an example. In my school, which is the Maliki school, a woman does not have to do any domestic chores by law. And this was literally legislated over 1,000 years ago, that she could charge for domestic work, her husband. Her money is discretionary; it's her own. That she, she's allowed to work. The Prophet Muhammad's wife was a merchant, Khadija. She was a merchant. She actually supported the Prophet himself, and so there are a lot of things, but there's definitely problems, and that is undeniable. And I think a lot of Muslim apologists would maybe take umbrage at that.
Right. Okay. So, look, from Meg's point of view, I asked her to step in on this because she's a 20-something-year-old. She's in university, hanging out with, and influenced by her peers and media. And so, what she is inundated with, Hamza, is of course, you know what she's inundated. She's inundated with conversations about burqas, about hijabs, about honor killings,
most of those things. First of all, honor killings are totally prohibited in Islam. That's cultural, and the Christian Arabs do that as well. There are honor killings in Jordan by Christian Arabs, so that is a cultural phenomenon. Genital mutilation is a cultural phenomenon. It's only in East Africa, and both the animists, the Christians, as well as the Muslims, all practice clitorectomies. But clitorectomies do not occur in any other places in the Muslim world. It's not part of Islam. So this idea of genital, Ayaan Hirsi always talks about genital mutilation in Somalia. That's a cultural pre-Islamic practice that was done. And it doesn't, the Moroccan women have never heard of that. Tunisian women, North African, Libyan women, they've never heard of that. So those are cultural. In terms of the hijab, both men and women are told to dress modestly. And this is something in Judaism. Orthodox Jewish women cover their heads or they wear a wig. In Christianity, the women were told to cover their heads. Traditionally, if you look at all our paintings from our Christian past, you'll see women. Every picture of the Virgin Mary of traditional shows her in a scarf. Nuns wore what's very similar to a hijab. And so those things those are part of the Abrahamic religious tradition that Muslims adhere to. The burqa, covering the face, is a cultural phenomenon. There are undeniably some opinions in amongst scholars that women should cover their face, but those are opinions. They're not from God. They're interpretations of men saying, well, when God says tell the believing women to cover their ornaments. Well, the face is the biggest ornament, so that means the face. But other scholars said, no, it doesn't, because it's not fair to the women to force them to cover their faces. So that's
I actually had a question about hijab specifically.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know, where do you think the idea of the oppressed Muslim woman came from in terms of hijab and burqas and things like that?
Well, I think part of it is that most Muslim societies, West Africa notwithstanding, and maybe Malaysia, most Muslim societies, especially Arab societies, are very segregated. And so you don't really see the women. Ottoman society was like that also. And so because of that, I think when Europeans went into the Muslim world, they just saw the women as being hidden away. Mm-hmm. But again, these are more cultural phenomena. During the Prophet's time, the women were clearly engaged.
Okay, but hold on. If Muslim women over here are born in Canada, raised in Canadian culture, and yet they're still covering up, it's no longer a cultural thing. It seems like it's the religion says we got to do it, so we do it.
Yeah, no, the hijab is part of the religion, and I think that most Muslim women in the West do not cover, but the ones that do cover out of religious conviction, and most of them do it by choice. I know many women whose husbands didn't want them to cover, and they're covering in spite of their husbands because they believe that they're told to. The same is true for fathers. A lot of fathers don't want their daughters to cover, and so that's but the covering of the head is definitely, that's considered normative Islam. It's a major thing, Muslims have made this kind of a sine qua non of being a devout Muslim woman, which is problematic to me because there are many devout women that dress modestly but do not cover their heads. But to say that, that's not part of the religion, I think would also be wrong as well.
Okay.